What happens when one of the most important waterways on Earth suddenly shuts down? In early 2026, the world got its answer. The Strait of Hormuz became the center of a global crisis. Thousands of ships were stranded, oil prices surged, and governments were forced to confront a question they had been avoiding for decades. What happens if Hormuz becomes unusable? The alarming part is that this wasn't a surprise. For more than 40 years, engineers, military planners, economists, and governments have warned about the dangers of relying on a single choke point. And for decades, they tried to solve it. Countless proposals were put forward, yet almost none fully solved the problem. In fact, when you add together the largest projects ever proposed, the total cost approaches an astonishing $900 billion, which raises an obvious question. If the world has known for decades that the Strait of Hormuz is vulnerable, and engineers have already proposed some of the biggest infrastructure projects in modern history, why is it still so difficult to bypass? And can any of these mega projects actually replace it? To answer that, we first need to understand why this narrow stretch of water became one of the most important pieces of real estate on Earth. Because on a map, the Strait of Hormuz doesn't look particularly impressive. It's a narrow waterway between Iran and Oman, connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. But for the countries inside the Gulf, it's the only maritime exit. Every day, oil tankers carrying energy from energy-rich countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, and other Gulf producers must pass through this corridor before reaching global markets. And the numbers are staggering. Around 20 million barrels of oil move through Hormuz every day, roughly a quarter of global oil flows. Massive volumes of LNG also pass through the strait, making it one of the most important energy routes on Earth. And the dependence extends far beyond the Middle East. China, India, Japan, and South Korea all rely heavily on energy shipments that pass through Hormuz, meaning any disruption can ripple across the global economy. What makes the strait so dangerous is that there isn't a convenient alternative. Many trade routes can be bypassed, even if the detour is longer or more expensive. Hormuz is different. The Persian Gulf is essentially a giant enclosed body of water with a single maritime exit. If that exit becomes restricted, there is no easy way around it. That's the real challenge. The problem isn't ships or ports, it's geography. And that dependence has worried engineers and governments for decades. Because the threat to the Strait of Hormuz isn't new. For more than 40 years, the world has been receiving warnings. The first major alarm came during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, when tankers were attacked, mines were deployed, and the route became so dangerous that some called it the Death Corridor. Then it happened again. In 2008, tensions over Iran's nuclear program sent oil prices soaring. In 2011 and 2012, new sanctions triggered fresh threats to close the strait. In 2019, tanker seizures brought attention back to the region. In 2025, another escalation raised fears of disruption. And then came 2026. The scenario planners had worried about for decades finally became reality. Commercial traffic was disrupted, thousands of ships were affected, and governments were once again forced to look for alternatives. What's remarkable is that every crisis produced the same response. New proposals appeared. Engineers unveiled ambitious plans. Governments launched studies. Massive infrastructure projects were discussed. Then, when the tensions eased, the headlines faded, and most of those projects stalled or disappeared. But one proposal stood out from all the others, because it didn't involve a pipeline, a railway, or a shipping terminal. It involved cutting a giant canal through mountains. Back in 2008, as tensions around the Strait of Hormuz escalated once again, engineers proposed an extraordinary solution. What if ships could avoid Hormuz completely? The idea became known as the Union Strait Canal. a 180-kilometer waterway linking Dubai to Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman. Instead of passing through Hormuz, oil tankers could sail directly to the open ocean. But there was just one problem. The Hojar Mountains, unlike the relatively flat Suez Canal route, this canal would have to cross some of the most rugged terrain in the region, and it wouldn't serve ordinary ships. It would need to accommodate VLCC supertankers more than 300 meters long and over 55 meters wide. Engineers considered three options: a sea-level canal, which would require an enormous amount of excavation through the mountains; a lock canal, similar to Panama, but with giant lock systems capable of handling modern supertankers; and the most ambitious idea of all, a canal and tunnel hybrid that would send ships through massive maritime tunnels beneath the mountains. None of the options came cheap. As planners added excavation costs, lock systems, tunnels, ports, and supporting infrastructure, estimates climbed toward $200 billion. Eventually, the idea fails due to its impracticality. But if cutting a canal through mountains sounded ambitious, the next proposal was even bigger, much bigger. Instead of bypassing Hormuz, this project aimed to bypass the entire region. The proposal called for a massive artificial waterway stretching roughly 950 to 960 kilometers across Saudi Arabia, connecting the Persian Gulf directly to the Red Sea. It became known as the Salman Canal. To put that into perspective, the Suez Canal is about 193 kilometers long. The Salman Canal would have been nearly 5 times longer. In this project, tankers could sail across Saudi Arabia itself, avoiding Hormuz altogether before continuing toward Europe, Africa, and other global markets. Supporters saw more than just a shipping route. They envisioned new ports, industrial zones, economic cities, and more than 1,000 kilometers of new artificial coastline. The canal could potentially transform huge parts of Saudi Arabia into logistics and trade hubs, but building it was another matter entirely. Unlike the Union Strait Canal, which had to overcome mountains, the Salman Canal had to overcome very large distance. Huge sections would cut through the Rub al Khali, one of the largest deserts on Earth. Extreme temperatures, construction logistics, water management, evaporation, and environmental concerns all created enormous challenges. Then there was the cost. Even conservative estimates placed the project between $80 and $100 billion. And as most mega projects have shown, initial estimates rarely stay that low. In the end, the canal remained a vision rather than a construction project. The scale was simply too large, the risks too high, and the costs too difficult to justify, which led planners to ask a different question. What if the answer wasn't a canal at all? What if it was a railway? In 2009, the Gulf Cooperation Council proposed another ambitious solution: a 2,177-kilometer railway connecting all 6 GCC nations: Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Oman. Unlike the canal projects, this one actually started taking shape. The idea was simple: move more freight across land instead of relying entirely on maritime routes. They envisioned a network linking ports, industrial centers, logistics hubs, and future trade corridors across the Gulf. The UAE moved furthest ahead through Etihad Rail, while Saudi Arabia expanded rail infrastructure and developed connections toward neighboring states. But connecting countries turned out to be much harder than laying tracks. Oman faced delays. Bahrain still lacked a national railway. Kuwait progressed slowly. Several key cross-border sections never moved beyond planning. The biggest obstacles weren't engineering challenges. They were political and administrative ones. Who would operate the trains? How would customs work? Who would fund each segment? And what happens when regional tensions interrupt cooperation? As delays mounted, costs climbed toward an estimated $250 billion. Yet, even if the entire network were finished tomorrow, it would still have one major limitation: Railways can move containers, goods, and people. They can't replace the enormous volume of oil moving through the Strait of Hormuz every day. The railway could reduce dependence on maritime trade. It couldn't eliminate it, and that realization pushed Gulf countries toward a different strategy. Instead of moving cargo around Hormuz, why not move the oil itself? Unlike the giant canal projects and massive railway networks, this solution actually got built. In 2008, the UAE began constructing the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, also known as the Abu Dhabi Crude Oil Pipeline. Its purpose was to move oil to the open ocean without passing through the Strait of Hormuz. The 406-kilometer pipeline runs from Habshan in Abu Dhabi to Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, allowing oil to be loaded onto tankers outside the strait. The project cost around $3.3 billion, entered service in 2012, and gave the UAE its first true bypass route. Most importantly, it worked. The pipeline can transport roughly 1.5 million barrels of oil per day, proving that bypass infrastructure was possible. But it also revealed the scale of the problem. When the Hormuz crisis intensified in 2026, the UAE quickly announced a second pipeline, West East 1, designed to run alongside the existing route and effectively double export capacity to Fujairah. Yet, even with expanded pipelines, Saudi alternative routes, and every existing bypass operating at full capacity, the Gulf still cannot replace the Strait of Hormuz. Not even close. Because under normal conditions, around 20 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every day. That's the number every alternative has to match. Now, compare that to the bypass infrastructure that actually exists. The UAE's Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline, and other regional export routes can move roughly 9 million barrels per day combined, which means that even if every bypass operates perfectly, more than half of the oil that normally moves through Hormuz still has nowhere to go. And that's the problem. After decades of planning and billions spent on infrastructure, the world's most important energy choke point still doesn't have a true backup. Pipelines help, but they have fixed capacities. Railways can move freight, not millions of barrels of oil, and the giant canal projects remain trapped between enormous costs, environmental concerns, and engineering challenges. For more than 50 years, engineers have discussed a little-known shortcut through the Musandam Peninsula, the rugged piece of land that sits at the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz. The idea dates back to the 1970s. Cut a canal through the peninsula and create a direct connection between the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf, saving ships roughly 65 kilometers of sailing distance. Compared to the massive projects we've discussed so far, the Musandam Canal sounds almost simple, but even this shortcut comes with major challenges. Engineers would need to remove huge quantities of rock, and tidal differences between the two bodies of water would require a lock system. Still, compared to $100 billion canals and continent-scale railways, it appears far more achievable. The problem is that it doesn't solve the real issue. It might reduce travel time and improve access, but it still wouldn't replace the enormous volume of oil and trade moving through Hormuz every day. And that brings us to the uncomfortable truth. When you add together the giant canal proposals, the GCC railway, pipelines, expansion projects, and other strategic corridors, the total value approaches $900 billion. Yet, the world remains dependent on the same narrow waterway. Because the real obstacle isn't politics. It isn't funding. It's geography. For nearly half a century, engineers have proposed canals through mountains, railways across entire countries, and pipelines across deserts. Yet one narrow stretch of water still controls a huge portion of global energy trade. And that's what makes the Strait of Hormuz so fascinating. Despite all the money, technology, and engineering expertise available today, nobody has found a true replacement for it. Because the next time Hormuz closes, the question won't be whether the world needs a backup. The question will be whether anyone can actually build one. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are many more untold stories waiting to be uncovered. See you in the next one.